Okay, no citizen comments. Next up is item 5. Who might be responsible for this extra attendance we have tonight? Paul Hopkins, he's going to discuss the changes in the assessment process. Paul, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you being here.
Oh, thanks for giving me the opportunity to kind of speak about it for a moment. I know it's the great secret right now about what's going on with the reval, but hopefully we'll be able to share a little light on the topic right now. So the general question is, what is the reval? And really what we're doing during the reval process is we're just putting everybody's property to its market value. So in regular terms, it's if you were to put your house on the market today, what we have provided to you is what we think most likely your house would sell for. And what we do is we use the current sales that have happened in town to make comparables to every other town, every other parcel in town. So that's how we're driving that. So we're saying these are what the sales are going on within the town, and this by those we think this is what other homes within the town are going to sell for, even if they're not on the market and they're not selling. One of the caveats to that is motor vehicles and our business personal property accounts. We reval those every year. So every year we put the current market price on cars and on our business assets around town. So real estate is the only one that we do only every 5 years. So we get a lot of questions that this is an unheard of type of increase that we're pushing onto our residents. So I did a comparison since the current reval statutes have been in place. So since our 1970 reval, we've conducted 9. We've had 4 that resulted in a higher percentage of change relative to the current one, and we've had 4 that had a relative lower amount of change. So therefore, you know, this reval was smack dab in the middle. It was number 5 of 9. So this is not an unusual change. It's just because it's every 5 years, it just gets kind of put back in the back of our mind. And as you can see, in 1990, the real estate went up 182%. So we're not even in the ballpark of the highest growth in town.
But that was a 10-year variance.
That was a 10-year, correct. Even if you doubled ours, we're only at 120.
It also, Paul, it also can track inflation to some degree.
Yeah.
It does.
One would expect.
And you can take into account, we had two cycles that had a negative impact to the grand list, which followed the crash.
Before we move from this page, could you comment on the determination of motor vehicle assessments?
Sure. So it's not a termination. We are changing, and there's a slide later on that briefly, but I can talk about it. We're changing the methodology of how we do motor vehicle valuations. Historically, we would use the JD Power or the NADA guide to bring every car in town to its clean retail price. So no matter what year it was in, we were bringing the car to its current sales market value. So what we've seen in the last few years is car values escalating. So even though used cars, we think in our mind that they've been decreasing relatively the last few years, post-COVID, we've seen an escalation. The state just passed a law that changed how we're going to price our motor vehicle list. They went to a standard depreciation schedule. So what we'll be doing is when the car is new, we'll be using its MSRP, and then we'll be depreciating it for about 20 years until you can put an antique plate on it. So what we can expect this going forward for this year is most people that have more reasonable or older vehicles will see a decrease in the amount of taxation they pay on their motor vehicle. Newer vehicles, it'll probably stay roughly the same. So if you bought a 2024 vehicle, most likely you'll still be paying similar rates as last year, but this will take effect and really move older, more modest vehicles to a lower assessment structure.
So
Thank
the
you, Paul.
depreciation is not straight line, it's based on each year, it's gonna be
It's
something.
based on each year and
Okay.
it depreciates down. We ended about 20 years. And the reason I think the state did that is it's when you can put an antique
Right,
plate
that
on,
makes sense.
on your
Okay, thank you.
vehicle.
But it is straight line or it's not
It's
straight?
not straight
It's
line.
not straight line. It varies by year. So it's a tiered lower system.
Okay.
It ends up being about 5% a year, roughly.
More front loaded, one would think.
So it's front loaded. Year one, they actually depreciate 15% from the MSRP, and then it's about 3%.
Somewhat follows market.
Right, so.
Thank you.
Yes. So the real estate gross in and of itself was about 385 million for this revaluation. Our real estate grand list last year was about 664 of the total, and the reval grand list this year is about $1 billion. Of that increase, residential properties went up about 61%. Commercial went up about 27%, industrial about 18%. Public utilities, which are CLMP, the water company, those went up 30%. Vacant land went up 82%, and I can explain why in a moment. Use assessments, which is our 490 land, went up 30%, and generally speaking, that's properties that are now in open space that were not last year. And apartments went up, I believe it was about 26%. And our relative total real estate change was just shy of 60%. The vacant land, the reason that was higher than other categories is the excess land and unbuildable land had not had a valuation change since our 2009 revaluation. So there was about a 15-year catch-up that we've had to do on our vacant land to get it to current market.
And Paul, why would apartments not be pacing? Rents have climbed.
So,
Rational.
and we've had quite a few apartment sales in town. You would think that the need for housing is driving real estate apartment housing complexes skyward. But for whatever reason, I don't know if it's because of the collection rates that are happening that we've noticed around town. Even though the actual amount of rent being contracted is higher, the amount of collectibles has not varied much since our last 4 years of collectibles. So we're seeing that although potential revenue for an apartment building is higher than it has been in the last 4 years, the actual effective income is staying relatively flat.
If I might, the values you're discussing are not market values, are they? It's 70% of them?
Correct. So
Okay.
when we deal with our assessments, state statute says that we have to assess property at 70% of its market. So when we provide people numbers, they have to add an additional 30% on top of it to get what the market value is. So this is about our specific grand list. This is, I think, where the Board of Finance is going to find most of the entertainment. So you can see for 2023, we came up with a 28.11 mill rate. This is a very rudimentary calculation. This takes no change. So we're not taking in change to the motor vehicle laws. We're not taking into consideration any budgetary needs for the town. All this calculates is saying we're taking the growth from the revaluation and applying it to last year's budget numbers. And that brings the mill rate down to 18.84. So when people are calculating that they got their new assessment and they're using that 28.11 mill rate and getting an astronomically high number, and then they call and are scared of what's happening, we use this as a relative ballpark number to get them generally about where they might be, depending on what happens during the budget and the final grand list totals. And again, this grand list doesn't take into account any appeals. So we're doing our appeals this week. So any lowered assessment or increased assessment from the appeals are not taken into account during this calculation either. This is gives everyone an idea of roughly the change in what the average assessments have happened around town. So last year residential was just under 156. We're almost now to 248,000. Commercial industrial went from 237 to 297, and then our apartments went from 178 to 223. So we have the sales available for everybody to look at, but these are relative to the change of property assessments relative to general locations around town. So I picked general properties around town. And what we noticed during this reval cycle is areas north or the northern section of town, any area near or easily accessible to Massachusetts, had much greater growth than the southern part of town. So as you can see, Dennis Road, which is probably one of our most northerly roads, had 75%, Bonnet Ave 67, East Thompson with quick access over the Mass border was 72. Top View in Quinnebog was at 73. And then you can see as we move south, they get progressively lower. So Valley Road was at 30, excuse me, 60. Gomo at 58, West Thompson at 54. So it stood to reason throughout almost the entire town that the rate of change from south to north grew as you got higher in town. And then I put Wrightson in there as many people probably think or know that areas along the water have escalated at tremendous rates relative to the rest of town. So that just gives an idea of where the rates are. And the town had its first sale over 1.5 million last 2 months ago. So that was an interesting sale that we found. So this is a strata of the single family sales that we used. So like I said, we had that one that was over 1.1 million and it was 1.55, I believe. We didn't have any sales between 900,000 and that $1.5 million sale. So it is an anomaly, but we did have other waterfront sales that we did to drive our numbers. But between 700,000 and 900,000, we had 4 sales. In the 600,000s, we had 3, 500,000s, 9. The 400,000s was kind of the beginning of our sweet spot, which was 42. 300,000s was about 58. So that's 3 to 500,000 was really where we saw most of our sales. The 200s, although we had 12, many of these were actually flips. So these were houses that were bought by a person who rehabbed the house and then resold it for over 400,000. So even though we had to include them in our sales, these are really resale situations. And then under 200,000, we only had 2. One was a 240 square foot cottage on leased land that was basically a shed that was about to fall down. And the one that was under $200,000 was a house right behind the gas station that sat down below the gas station.
And Paul, what time period was this?
So this
Full
was
5 years or is this more recent?
No, this was the last 12 or so months.
12 months.
Yeah. So these are not sales that go back to say, okay,
Sure, it's not a blended average over the 5-year period.
it is not. These are current market sales.
And the revals were actually done street by street.
Correct. We verify locate. So what we do is we break down our sales into neighborhoods and we use those neighborhoods to kind of come up with a homogeneous group of homes. And we use those sales that match that grouping to apply those changes to
And then
those
you
parcels.
use a square foot basis kind of thing on the house.
Correct. So what we do is we extract from our vacant land sales the amount of that the land's applying to the sale price, leaving us with the amount the house applies. And then we do a per square foot basis, and then we do match pairs, which means we look at 2 similar houses that may have only a bathroom difference. So we try to break it down to find out what each component of that sale is contributing to value.
And Paul, just so we're really, really clear, because there's a lot of people listening in and others will hear this after. When you say we, it's not the we, Town of Thompson,
Correct.
we have a third party.
Correct, so
Independently that looks at this, so it's not Paul or anyone else here making that kind of judgment, they're extracting that data, we contract them to do it.
So what we do is, I do my sales comparison. And the reval company, which was Municipal Evaluations, does their review, and then we compare and we find out where we're off. So if we have an area that we both come up with similar numbers, we're good. If there's areas where we're kind of argumentative, we discussed it and came up with a unified number that made sense to what the sales happened. So that way it's not just one set of eyes, it's not the reval company, it's just not the assessor's office.
Okay.
It's a cooperative to come up with good numbers.
Thank you.
But it sounds like you've done a very sophisticated approach. If you're counting bathrooms, it's not just square feet.
Yep.
I mean, you're really looking street by street, or neighborhood by neighborhood.
Right,
All right,
and,
sounds,
and we broke it down. One of the things that I talk about is even down to the outbuildings. So the outbuildings haven't had any type of new valuation structure since 2004. So it's been 20 years since anybody took a look at our outbuildings. So we went as far as looking at what things are selling for from outbuilding standpoint. We're looking at permits to see how much garages are costing people to build, and we corrected our assessments accordingly. So this breaks it down to even a little bit more detailed. So these are some of the sales that have happened around town. The one that I excluded was the 1.5 million one, as it's an anomaly, but we have Wrightson Drive that sold for $775. We have 458 Lowell Davis, which sold for $525. Donovan Drive, which we had ample amount of sales on, sold for $439.9, and so on. And we keep a listing of all the sales we used for analysis. So if anybody ever wants to have a list, we can provide that to them. We keep there's a copy on the table here. There's plenty of copies up in the assessor's office, so they're readily available for anybody to review. And as we talked about, the residual land has not changed since 2009. So we had about a 15-year catch-up period on our excess land numbers. Outbuildings haven't changed since 2004. So we had about a 20-year uptick that we had to analyze our outbuildings. And one of the things that we had to implement this year fully was the new zoning rules. So in prior revals, the building square footage for a lot was 1.84 acres or 80,000 square feet. Most of the town has been moved down to 40,000 square feet, which is 0.92 acres. The Lake District has changed. The center of town lot sizes have changed. So we had to refactor in each building lot or lot location to make sure that we're valuing according to the new zoning laws. So these are not really all that meaningful to most. These are some of the statistics that we use to make sure that we verify that our sales and our unsale properties are matching up. So the price related differential, this compares higher priced homes or higher square footage homes to smaller, more modest homes. And what we're testing here is making sure that they're changing at equal rates, so that the sales aren't saying that the small home should increase at 50%, the higher home should increase at 30%. And we're applying 50% across the board. We're doing a 1-to-1 comparison to the sales, that if the sales saying this segment of the town is increasing at X number of dollars, that's what we increased it at. If a different area of town is increasing at a different rate, we adjusted that at its appropriate rate. So by having it at a 1, it means that we use the sales to appropriately change values across town.
Could I back up 1 minute
Sure.
with regard to the zoning changes? How do you deal with properties, for example, that is less than 40,000 square feet, or property that is landlocked without any access?
So we had to do a review of those specifically, because those were difficult and we're getting a lot of questions on those. And what we had to do is we had to look at what contributing factors excess land values contributed to a parcel's value. So a parcel that may be almost buildable, but conforms to the neighborhood. So let's say it needed 0.92 acres and they only had 0.88 acres, but they had 150 feet of frontage and everything else on the property was upland, so it wasn't covered in water. We found out that by analyzing kind of what the vacant land sales, that those lots had about 30% of what a building lot would have. So that's for lots that somewhat were questionable whether or not, even though they may not conform completely to zoning, that they potentially could be built upon with a couple of extra steps by a builder. If a lot did not conform to any type of zoning, that, you know, it only had 2 feet of frontage, or it was only, you needed 0.92 acres and the lot was only 0.1. We priced anything that was abnormally far away from their requirements at about $4,500 a square foot. And through our residual land pricing, that's what we determined all residual land values in town is about $4,500 an acre.
Oh, an acre.
Okay, you said square foot. I was gonna question.
No, it's
I was about to too.
Yeah, no,
I was like,
it's an acre. So $4,500 for an acre. Our average sales price for lots, or our average value for a lot in town, and it's drastic depending on where you are, but roughly right now, we would say that a building lot in town will be somewhere around $80,000. Now, that'll vary depending on which section of town you're in, but that's a good average if we were to just average it out across the town.
And the landlocked parcel.
Landlocked is residual land, so it's $4,500 an acre. So if it's just a piece of land like out in the woods of West Thompson, it's $4,500 an acre.
Thank you.
No problem. So the sold unsold test, what this test is that we weren't sales chasing, meaning that we changed the assessments on our sold properties just to get to where the sales price was. And we didn't really effectively make those changes across the entire town. So this looks at the sales specifically, and then it looks at as the town as a whole. So by having a one-to-one comparison, what it does is it's testing that we didn't just change the sales prices or the properties that sold to their sales price and leave the rest of the town just as a afterthought. This says that we changed those houses that didn't sell at the exact same rate that we changed the houses that did sell. So we didn't, you know, just apply factors to the ones that sold to get them to their sales price. Mean, so this takes a look at the average price we are away from its sales price. So right now, if you look at what we listed our appraised values at relative to the houses that sold, we're about 2% lower than what they've sold for. And the median, you want to try and make the mean is the average, the median is the center point of an array. So when we're looking at the array of the town's properties, you want the mean, the average, and the midpoint of the median to be similar. And being 98, 97 in a calculation of 6,000 parcels is pretty darn close. So a little bit on our revaluation company, the company that assisted us in doing this. Revaluation, Municipal Valuation Services. They have the people that assisted me in doing the valuations were each MAIs, which is the highest designation that an appraiser in the state of Connecticut can achieve. They have the 3 we used were MAIs. I don't believe there's another revaluation company in the state that has one. So when we are looking at qualified individuals to assist in this, we did select the group that had the most experience and some of the highest qualifications possible. So, and then my last slide was about the motor vehicle law, which we had already touched on. So, so the possibility result in this law is I do believe that the motor vehicle grand list will probably not grow as extensively as it has in the last few years. they have the DMV is about 3 weeks behind in submitting the motor vehicle list to us. We usually get it within the first week of November, and we still haven't received it, so hopefully I'll be able to get that in soon and start working on it and get an idea of where our motor vehicle pricing's going. So I can provide that to you as soon as I have an idea.
Just curious, Paul, are they also using that methodology when you register a vehicle that's used?
No. Nope. You're still paying on its market value at the
I
DMV.
wonder why.
The sales tax.
Yes.
And
And that's the end of my presentation. So any other
They
questions?
get their
or-
money, we don't.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
On vehicles, if you have a vehicle that's off the road, not registered now, and it's not really drivable, why are we still taxed on it?
So taxation's based on ownership. Taxation isn't based on registration. So the only way to prevent taxation is to not own it. So if it's off the road and it's not in drivable condition, there's some real conditions. What you would have to do is go meet with the Board of Assessment Appeals. You can take some photos that show the condition, maybe it's not running,
Okay.
whatnot. And they have the authority to make changes to it. Again, how we've done it in the past is by statute, we have to use the clean retail price as dictated by the pricing guide. Last year, we had to use JD Power. So we can't make subjective changes from that, so we can't look at it and say, well, it's in poorer condition, so we're gonna move it. That's strictly something the Board of Assessment Appeals has to do.
But
Thank-
if you want the vehicle because you're gonna get another vehicle and you may be able to use parts. You know, it's nice to have it around, but why pay taxes on it when it's of no use as a vehicle?
But, and again, it's,
So I would have to go talk to them and see.
right. Yeah, and you can schedule an appeal in our office between February 1st and February 20th.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it.
If I could,
Bill, yes.
I just want you to check me on some thinking on going back to the valuations going up on used vehicles.
Mhm.
Obviously, that was a shock to a lot of people, myself included,
Mhm.
last year. By the state moving to this new approach. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that as long as you have the same vehicle from year to year, your property tax bill on that vehicle will decline. It would prevent it. I know you probably don't want to talk in absolutes, but it seems to me like if they're using a locked-in depreciation schedule, that you should see a gradual decline and it should prevent a used vehicle from increasing in value.
That was the goal of the law. Now, again, that doesn't take into account what the budget does. So can we absolutely say that it'll always go down? No, but the intent of the new law is to make sure that from year to year, you're paying a little bit less on your car than you did the year before. So that's the intent. In reality, will it play out that way? It's yet to be seen.
I think there's
Well, the
two
assessed
two
value-
sides to that.
Right.
There's the assessment
Right.
piece, and then there's the
There's
mill
the-
rate applied, to it,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
And we know we're normalizing the mill rate and working from that thing forward, so. I guess none of us want to make absolutes, but
Right.
I think directionally, we can kind
It's
of get a feel.
headed that way.
Okay. Paul, thank you.
Thank you.
Very much appreciated.
Could you go back to the new zoning rules and explain how it affected the Lake District?
So the zoning in and of itself just changed the amount of buildable land. But the zoning in and of itself didn't really have a big impact on the lake. The sales prices of the properties around the lake had
Can you
the,
explain the amount of buildable land difference? Change?
so the amount of buildable land is now for a house on the lake is 0.34 acres. Depending on where you were on the lake, it was different. There were some sections of town that you needed 80,000 square feet around the lake. I think along the Thompson Road section. There were some that were in the R40 and blanking on the small stuff. I think it was 0.1. I think you only need, or 0.15. So there were some sections around the lake that only needed 0.15 acres.
0.15 acres.
And now it's all unified as 0.34.
And And the rest of the town, how many acres did you have?
It changes depending on what section of town you're in. So the typical area, which is most of the exterior part of town, is about 40,000 square feet or 0.92 acres,
So almost an acre.
almost an acre.
I wonder, since we're sort of taking questions from the audience, if we might also, if there might offer that opportunity to the Zoom people, to the people on Zoom. It's a hot topic.
Sure.
Again, I don't know if anybody is, wants to, but,
You know,
and again, I know it's not the normal
yeah,
procedure.
this
It's
was
entirely
really
up to
intended
you.
to be a presentation, but I understand it's an important topic and a lot of people took the time to show up, so. We'll do that. Steve. It's a
I
good-
get it's up to you.
No, it's a good thought. We don't want to go into a very long, extensive Q and A. Paul's available
Yeah.
outside of here. I hope
I'm
that's
here
true,
every
Paul.
day.
Paul's here every day, so he's available on a one-on-one basis
Yep.
too. But thank you, Steve. And we'll open it very briefly. If there's anyone has anything top of mind that's concerning them or a question. On Zoom, is there anyone that has a question?
Looks like somebody has their hand up.
Okay.
No,
looks like
that
Paul.
doesn't, that's.
Oh, that's.
Paul, you have a
that's your-
No,
That was
Paul
for my
doesn't have a
question.
question. Okay. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
I'm not sure I have.
These are good conversations. We've got a lot more to go through, but Paul, you are available.
I'm here every day. If the town. hall-
Landlocked property
I'm here.
went way up compared to what,
Brian, you're not muted.
I know, I'm depressed about, I'm
You are
depressed, but I'm gonna say this, that's the best presentation from the assessor's office that I've seen in a long time. It was very informative. I appreciate him taking the time to go into it. I understood quite a bit.
1,000%, Brian.
That's a huge accomplishment, Paul.
I
Thank you.
believe it. Now I know when I put the house on the market, what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go talk to Paul first. No, it was a nice
To be able to,
presentation.
You'll
Thanks,
get
Paul.
you'll get a nice big house someplace, in the south maybe.
I am going small, Paul, small.
And I want to close it with just one quick comment for everyone that's listening or that took the time to attend, and that is, these years are very different than when we do a reval. This is my second one. Dave's probably been through a few of these. And in a non-reval year, if the mill rate increase was, I just use a really easy number, 1%, that 1% is applied to the entire population. In terms of the assessed value of the home. In this, now we're dealing with averages, right? The average increase was 60%. We normalize the mill rate back, and then we move from there, flat or down or up, depending on the budget. It doesn't impact everybody the same because the valuations changed off of that average. And I know last time, there were very broad statements that everybody's taxes are going up, and out of 3,000 properties, 3,000 plus last time, there was like 800 or 900 that actually went down. I'm not saying that's gonna happen again as a repeat, but if you're below the average on the increase, well below it, and there's a slight increase in the mill rate, you could actually in absolute dollars be paying, and Paul's nodding his head, you'd be paying less in tax. And the inverse is true, where if the mill rate were to climb 1%, that doesn't mean that your tax absolute dollars would increase 1% if your property was, very highly valued. It might move more. So it's a very confusing year. And and what I just said might be more confusing, but I was trying to kind of give people some perspective on why that is so different, when you and your neighbor might be different.
So when you're looking at it or you're thinking about this, just don't look at the new number change and say, oh my God, my assessment went up $100,000, so I'm gonna get crushed. What you do is you calculate your percentage change and you compare it to the norm. So the further you are away from the norm,
Up or down,
it will be your impact. So the further lower you are compared to the norm, the lower the impact to your taxes are gonna be. The further north you are of that percentage change, the higher the impact is gonna change to you.
exactly.
So it's not, because a house that went up 150,000 may have a completely different rate of change. So a house on, a section of town that the house was already at 400,000 and it went to 500,000, that $150,000 impact is not as great as if somebody was at $100,000 that went to 250,000. So it's a relative number that you have to compare to the whole.
Exactly. Yes, Dan.
Just a matter of comparison. Probably more so for us than the public. The grand list last year probably brought in 773,000 per mill.
Mhm.
This coming year, it's going to be close to 400,000 more than that per mill. So when we're talking about a mill increase, it's also a significant
That's
value.
That's correct. That's correct, Dave. Likewise with percent changes, a 1 mil rate increase on 18 is a different percent
Percentage.
increase than a 1 mil rate increase on 28. So
Mhm.
it can be a confusing year, I guess. We'll get through our budget cycle. Thank you,
Yeah,
Paul, again.
thank you.
for
And
coming.
like I said, I'm here 5 days a week. This week I'll be here 6, but
Okay.
if anybody has any questions or anything, feel free to call or stop by and I'll do my best to answer them.
Thank you,
Thank
Paul.
you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to item number 6.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I just want to point out there is someone with, it's Kristen Schultz.
I'm so sorry, and
With
I
her
did
hand
open it up to
raised.
questions, so, Paul, do you mind hanging on if I can't field this one or anyone here? Kristen, you have the floor, could you just, yeah, you have the floor. Not citizen comments.
You're muted.
Hi, this is Richard Schultz, Kristen's husband, 4 Jezerski Lane. I was listening in with her. Earlier on in the presentation, you mentioned that there were some disagreements between the reevaluation company and yourselves about some of these assessments, or at least maybe the approach or something. Could you speak to what those disagreements were?
So it's not necessarily a disagreement, but we may have percentage change differences. So one of the places that we had a lot of discussion is up towards Jezerski Lane around the lake.
Mhm.
And it's because we had very drastic changes in our sales. We had some in the 400s, some in the 700s, and the one at the 1.5. So when we were looking at those, for instance, the Reval company wanted to simply increase all properties at the exact same rate. When I started looking at it and through my analysis, it came clear that lots that were less than 0.3 acres, so our really small waterfront properties had a different rate of increase than our larger properties. So if you were on the water and you had a smaller lot, your rate of change was actually different than the bigger lots that were on the waterfront. So what we ended up doing is we tiered those sales according to size of lot to more accurately depict the sales that were going on around the lake. So it's not that either one of us were wrong, that we would have come up to proper numbers in either case, but it was just a methodology of getting there that was different. So, and being the assessor, I went out in my logic and we made those types of changes.
Thank you. That answers the question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate that. Okay,